Gatekeeper. This is a story about when I used to go abroad to study. I'm not going to reveal my identity if I tell you the name of the country, but let's just say it was a small country in Europe. I lived in a dormitory near a university during my 1-year stay. The university was in the middle of the countryside, in a rundown school building. Apparently, Europe has very strict building laws to protect the cityscape. The university was designated as a historical building and could not be renovated or torn down. That's why the walls are falling apart, the floors are wooden, and there is no air conditioning. If it were in Japan, I thought it would collapse in an instant due to an earthquake. Since the university is in such a state, the dormitories are just as shabby as well. The water supply is bad, there is a draft, and rats live in the dormitories. Of course, there is no air conditioning. There is no air conditioning or heating. There was a fireplace in the common area, so I managed to get by in the winter. The dormitory was surrounded by a brick wall, and the only way to enter was through the front gate. A small prefab hut was attached to the side of the gate, and a gatekeeper, an old man, was stationed there at all times. This gatekeeper was a new guy who came in a little while after I entered the dormitory, and he was a typical old man with a bad character, just like in the old stories. The dormitory gate had a closing time, and I had to be back at the dorm by that time. If you were late, you had to call the gatekeeper at the Tsumesho hut near the entrance. The gatekeeper would record the name of the offending student and report it to the dorm head at a later date. The offending student would then be called in and given a sermon, written reflection, or some other punishment. The previous gatekeeper seemed to have worked there for a long time and was a kind old man who understood the students. Once I missed the closing time by about 10 minutes. He said, "Hurry up and get in." I didn't see anything. With a wink, he let me go. He was a really dandy, good-looking old man. He had a beer belly and a body like a ball. But the new gatekeeper was different. He was picky about every little thing, and most of all, he was very nasty. Even if I was 5 minutes late, he would give me a sermon and report it to the dorm head. I had no choice but to listen to the sermon, which was long and boring, and it was hard to listen to. The gatekeeper only shows his face through the window of the hut, so he doesn't care if it's raining or snowing heavily outside. The sermons were longer on days like that, and some of us caught colds because of it. The room I was using was for 2 people, and I was sharing it with another foreign student. Let's call him P for now. P was an international student from a country famous for its yogurt, and he was so smart that the government supported all of his tuition and dormitory expenses. He also had a good personality, and was looked up to by everyone in the dormitory. He spoke to me openly, even though I was a first-time exchange student and a complete communicator. I think it was thanks to P that I didn't get depressed in an unfamiliar environment. Long preamble. Here's the main point. One day, P couldn't stand the new gatekeeper's behavior, so he went to talk to him. As I mentioned earlier, the gatekeeper's sermons were longer during bad weather. One student got caught in the sermon on a snowy day and became ill from being made to stand outside in the freezing temperatures for so long. The student, let's call him J, had always been weak and had caught a cold from time to time, but the incident caused him to catch a severe case of pneumonia, and he had to cancel his study abroad program and return to his home country. The reason why J was late coming home on a snowy day was because he had gone to the hospital. P insisted that the gatekeeper was responsible for aggravating the illness enough to send him back to his country and that he should be made to take responsibility. Specifically, he asked P to apologize, to pay him a fee, and also to review the rules for closing the gate. I think he said some other details, but my language skills at the time didn't allow me to understand. As a result, P was unable to continue his studies. Suddenly I got the news that P's scholarship had been terminated. Naturally, the cause was the gatekeeper. He felt that P was disturbing him when he came to talk to him directly and reported him to the university as a delinquent student. He sent a bunch of lies to the head of the dormitory about how he was constantly causing problems in the dormitory, and some of those lies were reported to the university in P's home country. Since P had come to study abroad as a representative of his country, even the slightest bad news would be detrimental to his country's image, so his scholarship was stopped immediately. That was the first time I saw the usually mild-mannered P lose his temper. I don't know how to put it this way, but I think his pride was hurt by the fact that he had lived his life as an honor student and was now being labeled a failure because of a self-serving accusation. His anger at that time was terrible. I thought he had lost his mind. Maybe he was really mad at that time. After receiving the news, P immediately went into action. This time, however, it was not a direct appeal, but rather a revenge action. The other students were also angry and resentful, and most of the students in the dormitory agreed with P's proposal because he was a popular person. Of course, I agreed. However, I was only told, "I want you to come to the basement of the dorm tomorrow evening." The next day I did as I was told and went to the basement of the dorm. The basement is a small hall, but for some reason all the electric lights were turned off that day, and there was only a candle burning in a candelabra in the corner of the wall. There were already quite a few students gathered inside the hall, all covered with some kind of black cloth. It was underground, of course, so no lights were coming in from the outside. The black masks in the dimly lit room were quite powerful and really freaked me out. One of the black masks came up to me and handed me the same mask. I looked closely and saw that it was P. "Put it on and wait for the rest of the day," he said. I put it on and waited for the rest of the time. When the guys around you yell something, repeat it and yell it back. They told me that, but honestly I was too scared to go back to my room right away. About half of all the dorm residents were in the hall. I heard that the gatekeeper was suspicious when all the students were gone, so the rest of the students were doing what they normally do. I really wanted to be a part of that. After waiting for a while, I heard footsteps coming down from above. I could tell they were coming down very slowly, making as little noise as possible, and they seemed to be on the lookout for something. I noticed that P and one other person were heaving on the wall right next to the bottom of the stairs, listening to what was going on above. When they heard footsteps approaching, they stretched out their arms and caught the person coming down. It was the gatekeeper. The gatekeeper didn't seem to understand what had happened, and before I could put up much of a fight, P and the others dragged me to the middle of the hall. It was there that I saw for the first time an axe in the middle of the hall. It was usually used to cut wood for the fireplace. The gatekeeper saw it and turned blue. Of course, I was blue, too. Are these guys trying to kill the gatekeeper? Isn't this a bit too much? I thought. I thought about going back to my room and calling the police, but I was surrounded by a group of people wearing black masks, so there was nothing I could do. I was hiding my face with the mask, but inside I was panicking and about to cry. In the midst of all this, P took off his mask and stood in front of the gate guard and said, "You're lucky I'm not a thief." I later learned that one of the students said, "I'm hearing suspicious noises coming from the basement. I think it's a robbery," and he had lured the gatekeeper away. Apparently that's why he was so alert when he went down the stairs. P was saying something to the gatekeeper, but I was too panicked to listen carefully. I could barely make out his theatrical way of saying, "Punish your vicious spirit and bring to justice the crime of cutting off the path of a young man." And somehow I understood the final sentence, "I will condemn him by beheading him." They blindfolded the gatekeeper with a thin cloth and held him down by the shoulders, pinning him in a sort of down on his earth position. The gatekeeper was sweating profusely and convulsing with a tremendous amount of dormitory grease. My mind was already racing, unable to keep up with my understanding of what was about to happen. P then pulled a handkerchief from his pocket instead of an axe. He folded the handkerchief into a triangle and gently placed it on the gatekeeper's neck while holding both ends and pulling. The gatekeeper jumped up on his knees. Then I understood that P did not intend to kill the gatekeeper. The blindfolded gatekeeper completely thought the handkerchief was an axe. If you hit his neck with it as hard as you could, he would think that he was really cut. I looked closely and saw another black masked man holding a camera next to P. He was planning to embarrass the gatekeeper by leaving him in a disgraceful state. At once, my shoulders relaxed. When I looked at it calmly, I saw that P was holding a handkerchief with a big smile on his face, and the black masks were also laughing aloud a little bit. I guess all students everywhere have this level of brains. "Bring him to justice," P shouted, and the black masks around him began to shout, "Judge him." I shouted, too. I shouted, too. P shook his handkerchief and put it on the gatekeeper's neck. The gatekeeper gave a mysterious cry like no foe, and fell on his side. He seemed to panic and jumped up like a fish. The camera flashed. We burst out laughing. After a short laugh, P tried to remove the blindfold from the gatekeeper. But the gatekeeper was still trembling, even though it had been quite some time. He was shaking, curling his body up as hard as he could, and even shifting his body into a shrimping position, which was an unusual behavior. The moment P, who became concerned, touched the gatekeeper's shoulder to take off his blindfold, the gatekeeper let out a yell that could not be considered human and stopped moving. Drool and bubbles came pouring out of his mouth. All at once, the basement fell silent. It was obvious to everyone. The gatekeeper was dead. Perhaps he had suffered a heart attack due to the tense situation. If he had been treated immediately, something might have been done, but unfortunately, we, mere youngsters, could do nothing but stand there and watch. Silence reigned for a while, and I was thinking about how I would probably be expelled if the university found out about this incident. I think everyone was probably thinking the same thing. And how to avoid it. "Let's bury him," P suddenly said. We didn't say anything, but it was clear that everyone agreed with him. We were the only ones who knew what had happened here. If we kept quiet, it would just be a matter of the gatekeeper's disappearance. Conveniently, the basement was simply hollowed out of the ground and the walls reinforced with bricks, and the ground in the hall was still dirt. I dug a hole under a crumbling brick in the wall and laid the gatekeeper down. His body was squishy, probably because he had not been dead long. He was still blindfolded. He covered the hole with soil and placed a crumbled brick on top of it to cover it up. When they returned from the basement, the waiting group in the room gathered around and wondered why the gatekeeper was not there. P said, "I made peace with the gatekeeper. He's going to be gone from the dorm for a while due to some circumstances or something like that, and we just let it slide." Of course, everyone looked suspicious, but they didn't say anything back because we looked so strange. A few days later, the university noticed that the gatekeeper had not been contacted and an investigation was launched. The police came and searched the dormitory and even asked some students, but in the end the gatekeeper was never found. I heard that the gatekeeper was treated as missing, but I did not hear any particular details after that. The police never thought that the gatekeeper was buried in the basement. A few days after that, P returned to Japan. Until then, P and I had been spending normal time as good friends and roommates. After that, nothing special happened, and I returned to Japan after finishing my study abroad program as usual. It was really a peaceful study abroad experience without any psychic phenomena or anything like that. This was 8 years ago. Nowadays, I thought that that gatekeeper was just a dream. That is, until I heard the other day that the old, decrepit dormitory had been torn down and white bones had been discovered in the basement. This is the end of this story. Thank you for listening to the end.